The Hobbit, or There and Back Again, is a fantasy novel and children's book by English author J.R.R. Tolkien. It was published on 21st September 1937 to wide critical acclaim. The Hobbit follows the quest of home-loving hobbit Bilbo Baggins to win a share of the treasures guarded by the dragon's mouth. Bilbo's journey takes him from light-hearted, rural surroundings into more sinister territories. This story is told in the form of an episodic quest, and most chapters introduce a specific creature or type of creature of Tolkien's Wilderland. Tolkien intended The Hobbit as a fairy story and wrote it in a tone suited to addressing children, although he said later on that the book was not written for children only. It had rather been created out of his interest in mythology and legend. The screenplay was written by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, Peter Jackson and Guillermo del Toro, who was originally chosen to direct before his departure from the project. The film takes place in the fictional world of Middle-earth, 60 years before the beginning of The Lord of the Rings, and follow the hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, who is convinced by the wizard Gandalf the Grey to accompany 13 dwarfs, led by Thorin Oakenshield, on a quest to reclaim the Lonely Mountain from the dragon's mouth. The film also expands upon certain elements from the novel and other source material, such as Gandalf's investigation at Dol Guldur and the pursuit of Azog and Bolg, who seek vengeance against Thorin and his ancestors. The first film in the series premiered at the Embassy Theatre in Wellington, New Zealand on the 28th November 2012. 100,000 people lined the red carpet on Courtenay Place, and the entire event was broadcast live on television in New Zealand and streamed over the internet. The second film of the series premiered at the Dolby Theatre in Los Angeles, United States on the 2nd December 2015. There are many differences and changes between the movie and the book. As a pro, the changes add depth to the story and meet the expectations of fans of the Lord of the Rings films. Tolkien himself revised The Hobbit in a later edition to a better tie into his later work, The Lord of the Rings. On the contrary, these films are too long, mature and violent for what is meant to be a children's story adaptation. The first film, An Unexpected Journey, has been widely criticised for being bloated, overlong, unevenly paced and too violent for young children. The book opens with a couple of pages of narration describing the life of hobbits in general, and that of Mr. Bilbo Baggins in particular. The first line of dialogue involved Gandalf approaching Bilbo standing outside the door of Bag End. The first lines of dialogue involve Gandalf approaching Bilbo standing outside the door of Bag End and announcing that he is looking for some people to join in an adventure. Frodo, whose birth does not come until 27 years later, does not appear in the story. Having the familiar faces of Holm and Wood appear in scenes that bookend the three Hobbit films serves to draw interest of fans of the Lord of the Rings film trilogy. It also reminds the audience that Bilbo's adventures served as the catalyst for the events chronicled in the Lord of the Rings. On the contrary, these new scenes of Bilbo and Frodo would undoubtedly require the invention of dialogue, not found in the original book. Besides, the inclusion of Gandalf, not to mention Elrond and others, serves the same purpose. Bilbo in the main story is played by 40-year-old Martin Freeman, while Bilbo in the book sequences is played by an 80-year-old Ian Holm. Although Bilbo was 51 years old at the beginning of The Hobbit, and 111 when he departed Bag End of The Lord of the Rings, the book states that the passage of time had little effect on Bilbo. At 90, he was much the same as at 50. At 99, they began to call him well-preserved, but unchanged would have been nearer the mark. As a pro, it was not feasible to have Ian Holm play Bilbo again in the action-packed Hobbit films. as it was the elderly actor filmed his book and scenes entirely on soundstage at England's Pinewood Studios. On the contrary, the ring's slowly effect on Bilbo's again process is an important plot again. Even in The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf observes that Bilbo hasn't aged a day. Showing old Bilbo and his younger version in the same film calls to attention that they are played by different actors with a wide age difference between them. In the movie, Radagast the Brown, played by Sylvester McCoy, appears throughout the films as one of Gandalf's fellow wizards. From the titles in the Hobbit soundtrack, Radagast first appears prior to Thorin and company's encounter with the Trolls. Radagast's hair is stained with bird droppings due to his feathered friends living under his hat. In the book, Radagast is indeed one of the 5 wizards, or Istari, who the Valar sent to Middle-earth in the guise of Old Man to aid free peoples against the return of Sauron. However, Radagast appears in The Hobbit only by name when Gandalf mentions his good cousin Radagast, who lives near the southern borders of Mirkwood, to Beorn. Gandalf again refers to Radagast in The Lord of the Rings, when during the Council of Elrond, the Grey Wizard explains that Radagast the Brown delivered Saruman's message summoning Gandalf to Orthanc. As a charge of King Thranduil and commander of the Woodland Realm protection troops, Tauriel is very opinionated and passionate about representing what she thinks is right. She proves herself as a warrior with the use of her 2 daggers and bows and arrows. Like Legolas, Tauriel turns to be extremely quick and agile in battle. She has lived for hundreds of years in the Middle-earth, but is still one of the youngest of the elves and has rarely ventured out of the Great Forest. In the book, no such character appears in any of Tolkien's works. Filming of the dwarfs escaping in barrels. When they escape the 11 Kings' Hall by floating down the forest river inside barrels with their heads sticking out of the open end of each barrel they are riding in. This scene is actually completely invented. In fact, the dwarves are sealed inside the barrels until they arrive near Lake Town, where Bilbo releases from their uncomfortable vessels. And also, no orcs battle is involved. On the Pro, it is more interesting for filmgoers to see the dwarves' faces and expressions as they float down the river and how they battle the orcs. On the contrary, this is an unnecessary departure from Tolkien's story,